All right, good afternoon, everyone. It's Dr. Dan Ritchie, president of the Functional Aging Institute. We're back with one of our live webinars, special this week on Thursday because of the holiday. So don't mind the time, but I know many of you will catch this even on the replay. We got a good live crowd here today for Thursday afternoon. So if you've not seen Doug speak before, they have sponsored the summit in the past, sponsoring the summit again this year. Remember, June 13th and 14th, it's coming up. Gosh, it's just 2 weeks away. If you don't have your ticket, there's still time, though I am hearing, Doug, that we're going to sell out. I didn't know you could sell out a virtual summit, but apparently there are limited tickets due to the number of seats in certain live rooms and technology. So really encouraging people, don't wait till the last day because you might be left out in the cold, so to speak, on a virtual event. So again, June 13th and 14th, functionalagingsummit.com. Doug Katona is coming to us from American Barbell, and I'm sure he's going to give us more information about his company at the end. AmericanBarbell.com if you want to check them out. Doug, I'm gonna be here. If somebody asks a question I think is worth interrupting, I'll interrupt you. Otherwise, we'll save 10 to 15 minutes at the end for live Q&A. Before I kick it over to you, find the question box. I think that works best in GoToWebinar. Find the question box. Tell us where you're tuning in from, around the world, country, time zone. If you've ever heard Doug speak before, if this is your very first time, and I want to know if you already have your ticket to the Functional Aging Summit. So, Doug, thanks so much for doing this. We value your time, so please take it away.
Dan, it's you and I have not connected enough, man. So it's good to hear your voice, and I hope you're doing well.
Yeah, it's been a while. You can only connect virtually these days or at conferences, and a lot of times you're like passing ships at live conferences. I'm at this one and you're at that one. So
it's so true. It's great, right? Because the fitness industry needs more of this, right? So congratulations to FAI and what you guys are doing. So I think for everybody on the call, like it's super effective and super needed in this industry to get this type of information out. So I applaud that. So thank you for that, Dan. That's awesome stuff. And everybody that's listening, this is going to be, I'm going to give you a lot of information, but I'm going to make the complex very simple today. I've been training, coaching, and competing athletically for 25 plus years. And, you know, when I was a competitive cyclist, a category 2, very successful cyclist, I always rode and trained less miles than most of the guys I was competing against. And it was always because I was in the weight room. And I actually used the weight room for recovery. And I used it in the off season. I used it to get stronger. And you know, I'm in my late 50s now, and I will tell you that athletically, I feel just as good as I did in my mid 20s. I was in Texas. I live part-time in Texas and California. I'm in Texas now, and I walked onto a pickleball court, never playing before, and my athletic ability allowed me to play really well, right? And I think that's what I want to talk about today. Is think about those of you that are on the call. What do you want to achieve with your training, right? You're working out, you're training, like what are you missing? Where are you weak, right? If I were to ask each of you, write down a few goals right now, what would they be? And then write down 1 or 2 things that are preventing you from getting to that goal. So just reference that as we're talking. And I'm going to open up with a couple of things on this programming and what we're going to talk about today, which is really squatting, pressing, and deadlifting. That's the big 3, right? The big 3 is where it's at. You know, in this day and age of cold plunges and saunas and H2 tablets and GLP-1 and supplement saturation and everybody going sober, and it's just, I think people are missing the basic essential things to get done in your program. And I've experienced this, you know, I'm in gyms all the time, right? American Barbell, we make product for the big players in the industry. A lot of you may not know that. So if you walk into Planet Fitness, that's our product. We make the dumbbells and the barbells, and you know, as a lifelong athlete, I take a lot of pride in that product. But maybe even more importantly, I want to see the product used the right way. And when we do a lot of certifications and education for trainers and coaches in the industry, we always seem to come back to the big three. We always seem to come back to making sure, number one, people are squatting to parallel, which actually saves knees. It doesn't hurt people's knees, right? So if you're a really good coach or trainer, start thinking about doing the opposite of what most people think, and you'll probably be pretty successful. It's worked for me really well. I said something the other day, a guy walks up to me in a coffee shop in Texas that I go to. It's called Ironworks Coffee in Weatherford, Texas. Great little spot. A lot of gyms around there. Sees my t-shirt on. He goes, "Hey, what do you do?" We started talking, and then we got into the fact, oh, he's 48 years old, former tennis player, and he has a really bad back. And I said, "Well, can you tell me what you do in the gym?" "Oh, well, I can only do cardio work and some upper body exercises." And I said, "Well, are you deadlifting?" Right? So I said, "Are you deadlifting for your back?" And he looked at me cross-eyed. And I said, "Well, if you have a bad back, you should be deadlifting." But how many coaches and trainers, or maybe some of you that are listening, don't deadlift? It might be the single most important exercise for the human body to do. If I had one exercise to choose and that's all I could do, I probably would deadlift. And we'll get into the progressions and a little bit more detail on that. And then the other thing is the bench press, right? Or a pressing movement. The bench press might be, if you don't have a lot of time to train, so I don't know how many of you have families, or you're busy, or you walk into the gym, you're not sure what to do, or you just want to be time efficient. And you also want to hit a lot of muscles really quick. I mean, the bench press might be the single best upper body exercise to do. So the theme is really, getting that athleticism back, getting strong, and you don't have to do a lot. I think I see a lot of people in the gym doing a lot of unnecessary movement. You want to do movements that are compound. You want weaknesses in your body to be exposed. I mean, the best athletes in the world that I'm around, they don't work on their strengths, they work on where they're weak. So those of you that are training right now, do you know what your weaknesses are? Right? Do you know what you need to improve on? And then is your training program actually reflecting that? Right? I've been guilty of that. A lot of people are. You've heard the expression. I had a baseball coach once say, the best players practice what they do worst, and the worst players practice what they do best. Right? So I think it's just really important to focus on what's important. And this is why the squat, press, and deadlift are fantastic exercises. One of the things I put on the slide was, I always get the question in programming, especially because we program for a lot of athletes, well, I spend a lot of time stretching before I train, and I stretch after. And I said, well, what are you stretching for? And this is a controversial subject for a lot of us strength coaches, but we don't stretch a lot. So if you're strong and you put load on your back, and you're doing a back squat, for example, that load on your back, gravity is pulling you down at 9.83 meters a second. That vertical load, that gravity pull down is going to actually make you more flexible. So the deeper you can squat, the more flexible you will become, for example. So I think it's also really important, and this is a time savings thing, Dan. Like a lot of people, I think, overstretch, or it doesn't really have much application or utility for what their goals are in their fitness program. So I will challenge everybody out there to spend more time under load, squatting, pressing, deadlifting, and watch what happens to your flexibility. And that's always we get to talk days about that. We're doing, I do all of the training and education for the New York Sports Club group. I think they have about 50 gyms, and their CEO, Bill McMenemy, and their vice president, Ryan Pastore, are leaning into this, and their gyms are doing fantastic. Their personal trainers are flourishing, and they're focusing on the simple. They're focusing on simple stuff, right? So I'll talk a little bit more in this webinar about squat, press, and deadlift. I think what's important here, and everybody can read the slides, I'm not a slide reader, but just because we say squat, press, and deadlift doesn't mean you have to turn into a power lifter. The great thing about squat, press, and deadlift is there's lots of variations and there's a way to start them. So my mom is 82 years old and she's visiting me here in Texas from California. And this morning in the garage when I'm training, I was teaching her how to goblet squat. And she's got a little bit of a knee issue. And she loved it. And I taught her how to squat down to a bench. And then my dad was complaining about a bad low back, and I put a lacrosse ball on the arches of his feet to help his lower back. And he's like, God, how did that work? Right? So there's these little things that are super simple to accomplish. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we roll forward. This slide is really because of business, I'm always looking at my return on investment, right? And so that's why I said it's a 3x on the big three. So if you don't have a lot of time to train and you want to get more out of each exercise, it's another reason I really like squat, press, and deadlift. For example, this morning I didn't have a lot of time because I had to get ready for this and get in and go through some meetings. So I literally was in the garage and did a 5x5 heavy bench press and a 5x5 heavy deadlift, and that took me all of 37 minutes according to my MyZone, and I felt great. Right, it was hard, but I got a lot done in a little time because those movements are using a lot of musculature. And remember that we're not just talking about getting strong. We're talking about flexibility. We're talking about balance. We're talking about being able to move and not hurt yourself or lift things that are uneven. That's really important. And I find that as people age, especially, they slow down. They don't speed up. You should actually be speeding up. And that includes your strength training. We'll talk about that. And the other big thing that I experience a lot, Dan, is people are almost intimidated or afraid. And I see this in personal trainers all the time. This is the reason why New York Sports Club, for example, is accelerating faster than any other group out there in the fitness industry. They're actually starting people on the barbell. They're not saying, well, gosh, I don't know how to squat or I don't know how to press or deadlift, so let's go lift a kettlebell. It's not what we're doing. We're actually teaching people athletically how to handle a barbell, because through the barbell, there's a lot more progressions and opportunity for variation of movement. So we always say it's the opposite, right? If we can start somebody on a barbell, that's what we do. And those of you that have garage gyms, just like I said, if the deadlift is probably the single best exercise to do, if there was one piece of equipment that I would start you with, it probably would be a barbell, because you can do everything with it. You can do bicep curls with it. You can do your tricep work. You can squat, press, deadlift. And so we always like to start people on the barbell. And again, the progression part to this is really important, and we'll address that as well. And then, of course, I'm going to talk a little bit in the next few minutes about programming. I would say, and this is a trend, this is one of the most trending topics in the industry at the moment, is programming. You know, when you walk into a gym, it drives me crazy because I think the personal trainers and the coaches should be responsible for programming their clients and their customers. Yet there'll be trainers in a gym and you'll see somebody walk in with their device or the phone following a program, and most of the programs that we're following or you're seeing on Instagram are probably not very applicable, or they don't have utility for what most of you on this call really need out of your program. So everybody's individual, right? So everybody can still squat, press, and deadlift, but some of you may start with a deadlift rack pull before I give you a traditional deadlift. So there's so many variations here, but the way you program those exercises is critical to your success. And keep in mind, I haven't said anything about lifting heavy yet. So I think that's another myth that's out there, that, oh my gosh, if I squat, press, and deadlift, and I use a barbell, I need to lift really heavy. That's not the case. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the variety of the movements and the progressions that you can get to. The eventual goal is to lift heavy. And then the eventual goal after learning to lift heavy, which is actually quite easy, is to lift heavy with really good skill and technique, and then lift heavy with really good skill and technique and lift fast. That's the winner right there. So we'll talk a little bit about that when we get into the programming piece. I did put the middle part of the slide says max effort and dynamic. So this really comes from who I believe is arguably the pioneer in fitness programming, strength programming, and his name, rest his beautiful soul, Louis Simmons. And I had a pleasure of meeting him and hearing him many, many times. And I learned a lot of my programming and a lot of how I structure what I do with athletes with a conjugate method-based program. Conjugate means change. And Louis and Westside Barbell are very well known for max effort and dynamic effort lifting. What that means is there are days that you should lift heavy, and we do mean heavy. And there are days that you should lift light and fast. So that's the good news. Doesn't mean you have to go into the gym, and this is a common mistake. I think a lot of you, if you're asking yourself right now, geez, am I always going to the gym and lifting heavy all the time? Is it okay to lift quick? If you're lifting with the same rep cadence, so your repetitions are going at the same speed all the time you walk into the gym, change that up. Some days should be heavier, some days should be lighter, some days should be quicker. Think about when I said athleticism, what does that mean to you? If I said, when you're watching sports, are basketball players, football players, baseball players, well, maybe not baseball players all the time, because I was a baseball player and the game moves a little slow. But if you look at a lot of the active type of sports, they change tempo, they change speed, they change power requirement. All those things are essential to developing good fitness. So one of the things as a cornerstone to a lot of our programs, and I did the same thing, hard intervals, carrying things, all these things really relate to what we're talking about here. But this is the totality of how you program people. And I'm going to show you a really cool solution to this in a few minutes when we conclude here in about 15 minutes on how you would structure a typical week of programming. And the last thing on this slide, Dan, is something called a monostructural. What monostructural means is it's one movement. So just like I referenced this morning, it was bench press and deadlift for me. The good news about this is it takes a lot of the thinking away from what you have to do in your program. Monostructural means you're doing one movement at a time. It's not like you're doing 5 rounds for time of something, or you're doing kettlebell swings and then sit-ups and then pull-ups. The beautiful thing about squat, press, and deadlift is if you just do one movement at a time, it's really effective. So it kind of almost simplifies, I think, a lot of programs out there. You just have to know when to go heavy, when to go light, when to go fast. And that's usually in the context of an entire week. So this is what I just referenced. This is a typical, it's a training matrix is what we've coined it. And a lot of people use this now. We've been using this for over a decade. And when we go and we do seminars for a lot of trainers, live seminars, because we love live seminars, this is what we teach on programming. So those of you that, if you wrote down, you know, what are your fitness goals and what are you doing, and you think in terms of how do you approach when you go into a gym on a weekly basis, this is a great snapshot to say, look, these are the things I should be doing to get really fit, really strong, really fast. Again, speed, speed, speed. I think a lot of people in seminars get tired of hearing me say speed. I think a lot of people, as they grow older through their program, slow down. I want to see you speed up. That's where all the good stuff is. If you listen to Dr. Attia and some of the other really well-known strength and conditioning experts now, a lot of the movement and exercise science guys that really know what they're talking about, everybody's referencing VO2 max as one of the top indicators of longevity, and I firmly believe that. So if you are not doing enough hard intervals, that includes with the barbell, you know, take a look at what you're doing on your program. At the end here, I'm gonna suggest if some of you want to send me some of those, I'm happy to look at some of the programs as well. So it's kind of my thank you for listening to me for 40 minutes. But this is really a solution and a roadmap. So we have squatting, pressing, and deadlifting 2 to 3 days a week. And again, with squatting, there are progressions, right? So we always start with a body weight squat, then we go to a high bar back squat, then we go to a front squat, and then we attempt to introduce an overhead squat. So those are the progressions we go through. If you can show proficiency and competency at a body weight squat, we will put a barbell on your back and immediately start you with a high bar back squat. So again, those progressions are really important in squat, press, and deadlift. Body weight squat, back squat, front squat, then overhead squat. In fact, the overhead squat, if there was one movement to really physically assess somebody's strength, weakness, their balance, their control, their agility, their mobility, I would give them an overhead squat. It's one of the first things we do when we're assessing athletes before we program. I'll give them a PVC pipe and watch them overhead squat. Then if they can do that with proficiency, I'll put a 15 kg barbell on, and then everything changes, right? The moment you put load overhead, those little muscles have to kick in, your balance, your control, your midline, your core, all that have to engage. So press is the same way, and it's not just bench press. So this is really important, right? Because I think everybody says, oh, you just want to bench press all the time. It's not the case. A push-up is a press. We actually teach and watch and use the push-up as the first progression into pressing. I would say 75 to 80% of the trainers and coaches that I see cannot perform a proper push-up, chest to deck, full lockout on top, understanding how to externally rotate their shoulders, move in one unit. These are all these things that before we introduce the barbell or more load or more weight that we always look at. Push-up first. If we can get that proficient, we go to a strict press, like a military press, some people call it, a push press, a push jerk, and a bench press. So those are the progressions. And again, here's the good news. Be patient. Some of these may take you 3 to 5 weeks to become proficient at if you're doing them 2 or 3 days a week, or you're at least warming up with them at light load. You can do a lot of these as your warm up. So I think people don't know what to do in a warm up. And I say, look, if you want to keep it simple and you don't know, go super lightweight, do some squatting, some pressing and deadlifting, then get into what you need to do, right? At least it teaches you to go through a full range pattern, and also kind of reinforces some of those movements that you're going to need when you start to go a little bit heavier, right? The human body really responds to adaptation to movement. Unfortunately, most of you, if you go into a gym, how many people do you see really look like athletes moving around? They don't, because they've been either sitting too long, or they've not been taught how to move properly with the right biomechanics, or they haven't learned how to harness gravity and physics when they lift. Right? In our seminars, we teach, I always open up the seminar, Dan, and I go, well, today we're going to learn about physics. And everybody looks around, and I'm going to say, yeah, we're going to teach you how to harness gravity with a barbell and how to move everything in a straight line. If you move everything in a straight line on a squat, press, and deadlift, you know what? You're going to be pretty darn efficient and safe. So again, I could talk for a long time about that. The deadlift, 1 to 2 days a week. That's good news, right? You're not doing it every day. And that might be a heavy day and a light day. And so on the deadlift, there's a lot of variations there. The traditional deadlift is what most people know. Some people with longer femurs, basketball players, for example, we may start with a sumo deadlift. And if you do have a bad back, remember, you need to be deadlifting. That means you may be doing a rack pull, which means you're putting the barbell up on the little J hooks on the squat rack, and you're only lifting maybe from high shin or knee level. But again, we're trying to train the body into that pattern so it adapts to good position. So again, yes, we love to lift heavy, but having good skill and technique first is going to prevent injury. I hear a lot of people say, well, I can't deadlift because my trainer said it's dangerous. Well, your trainer's dangerous, bro. It's the deadlift is fantastic. In fact, a lot of people can get hurt. I always say people hurt people, movements don't. So if you know how to properly align yourself in space with load, you'll be fine. You can get injured on a 95-pound deadlift just as bad as you can on a 395-pound deadlift. If your position and your skill and your technique are not what they should be, then you could hurt yourself. Think about this. If I asked some of you are probably really strong, I'm sure, but if you couldn't lift, if I put 500 pounds on a bar and you've never moved that before, but your form and your technique are excellent, the worst thing that's going to happen is you just can't lift the load off the ground, but you're not going to get hurt. If I was coaching you on proper skill and technique, you'd be fine. If you didn't know how to move, or you didn't know how to orient your body to the ground and in relation to load, then you can hurt yourself on light load. And we see that all the time. And that's why shoulder injuries occur, right? That's why people that come to us and say, well, I have a shoulder injury, I have impingement. I said, great, we're going to start pressing. But they've always been told the opposite. Well, don't press because your shoulders hurt. Well, at what point are you going to be able to press again? Like, don't we all kind of want to reclaim this proper movement? And this is how we, came out of the womb, right? That's kind of the goal of this training matrix as well. And then we mix in some other things that we're not going to spend a lot of time on: stamina, strength, and sport specific. When I say stamina, you're never going to hear me, my coaches, or people that we educate say cardio. We just don't do cardio. It's stamina based. We want to make sure that your heart, again, that VO2 max component of longevity is really important. Is the stamina work, your cardiovascular training, enough? Is it enough in intensity, right? That's why I'm a big believer in gauging heart rate and knowing what some zones are. I use a MyZone. It's super, super simple, and it really tracks. It keeps me honest, if you will. And I kind of like it. You learn to adapt to that intensity, and it actually feels really good. And of course, the other big byproduct here, everybody, is this is good for your hormones too. Strength training and using the squat, press, deadlift, and using enough weight, it's also really good for your hormones. It helps you sleep better. It helps you deal with anxiety if you're anxious. If you're like me, it's I don't have a 9-to-5 job. I have a 5-to-9 job, but I really love it. And I think if I didn't train every day, which I basically try to train every day, I wouldn't be able to deal with all the things that I deal with, right? And keep my family life balanced. So I think this training matrix is a really important role for a lot of you. So the last thing I'm going to say on this is, if you need resource or guidance for this, there's a lot of things you can reference. We have a lot of material that we're putting out. Some of you that are just learning how to squat, press, or deadlift, I would highly advise you to seek a professional strength and conditioning coach. I think this is a big turning point in our industry where, a lot of personal training programs, for example, are suffering because people are going somewhere else to get the information, but yet they're going into gyms all the time. This is where trainers can really capitalize on the big three: the squat and the press and the deadlift. Start teaching those. And you need to know how to do those, right? So come to one of our seminars or track me down. But I always say that, you can't coach what you haven't done. And once you learn how to really do these movements and introduce these movements to people, what you're going to find is they really like them. And we also find, ironically enough, that, us men have egos, right? So a lot of times we're afraid to admit we don't know how to lift a barbell or deadlift. There's a really good friend of mine. His name is Josh Wheeler. He's the former CEO of Texas Family Fitness. He recently, good for him, they sold their company to Planet Fitness here in Texas. Before they sold, we did a couple of programs for him. And one of the things we did is we introduced a women in weightlifting class. And it sold out within minutes. And I did the first seminar, and the room was packed, and all the ladies really were gravitating because I think they're just better than men, not afraid to actually say, I don't know how to do something. I really want to learn. And now that room is full, and they don't have enough barbells, and it's a Planet Fitness, believe it or not. And we're seeing that trend, by the way, right? That's a very real trend. The other thing I will say is the time to change from being a personal trainer into a coach is now. Trainers train horses and coaches coach people, right? If coaches are responsible for the totality of the program of the customer, and this is for a lot of you if you're coaching yourself or following your own program, it's not just your training, right? It's nutrition, it's training, it's your recovery, it's your lifestyle. I call it, it's more spirituality to me, but it's how you're treating other people. All those things are a totality. And I think a lot of trainers should be leaning into that. I think a lot of you, when you're looking at your program, a bad diet's going to outperform good training. You've heard that. And I think that's true. I think if your program is just about lifting, look at the other things that you're doing. And again, if you don't have time or you're time compressed, squat, press, and deadlift are wonderful things to do. And I will conclude with this. You have 168 hours in your week. So think about this. Where do you spend that time? Think about this for a minute. How much time of that week do you waste? Scrolling. Maybe you're watching TV, maybe you're just kind of sitting around. A lot of people are working remotely and they're multitasking, but they may not be getting a lot done. And then when you're in the gym, how much time do you waste? Right? There's a lot of people, would you agree, that walk into the gym that spend 60 or 75 or 90 minutes there, but you could get the same thing done with better intensity and probably a better byproduct of eliciting more power in 40 minutes. Right? That allows you to be entrepreneurial or have your side hustle or do what you want to do. And I think that's a big part of this programming piece, is to look at the other things that are eating up your time when you walk into the gym. Good trainers and good coaches look at that when they're programming an athlete out. We've done this exhaustively with, I mentioned the New York Sports Club group. We're working very closely with them right now. And this is the subject matter of what we're talking about with their trainers and their fitness staff is, how are you programming for that client? If you see somebody 2 or 3 hours a week, but there's 168 hours in a week, do you really think you're going to change behavior? Because a lot of this with programming and fitness is really, it's behavioral change. But if you're programming and you're a great trainer, but you only see that person 2 or 3 days a week, and those are your only touch points, and you're not programming for them on a daily basis, super important, right? That's why we only look at programming from a weekly perspective, right? Because would most of you agree, and there's a lot of great programs out there, right, that are 6 weeks long and 10 weeks long. That's a very small percentage of the people that are capable of adhering to that or being compliant to that. I can't do it, right? My daughter gets sick, or my Great Pyrenees dog the other day ran down the street and I had to go chase her down. Something happens that's going to eat up part of that time, right? So look at that, analyze that. I think that's really, really important in what you do. So my time is about up. I could keep talking about this because it's just, I love it. But Dan, I'm going to turn it over back to you. And if there's any questions you want me to answer, I also put email here. We have a lot of courses that are live courses. There'll be some coming up in New York very soon. And then if anybody has a squat, press, deadlift video, please email me and I will get back to you and give you a little bit of guidance on it. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much, Doug. That was great. I had this same question and I'm glad Dana asked it. So what about pulling exercises? You know, you talked a lot about the importance of pressing. What about, pulling movements?
That's an intelligent question. So in the course of a program, we do often include pull-ups, chin-ups, one-arm rows, seated rows that are also compound in nature. Keep in mind that a deadlift technically is a pull exercise.
Yep.
So a deadlift, I referenced it earlier, it's a full body movement. If you haven't done it, it's a full body movement. And if you're doing a push-up correctly, this is interesting. If you're doing a push-up correctly with proper alignment, guess you might be sore, probably in your lats a little bit. So again, people are like, really? Yes. And this is what we're trying to teach. But yes, we do a lot of that. Keep in mind, we don't call it a push or a pull. We call it a press or a pull because biomechanically, technically, your muscles never really push. Everything's a pull biomechanically. So good question
though. Can you go back? Lester asked about the slide, the 4-14-24 rule, when referring to strength plus stamina. Can you give just a little bit more definition on this?
Yeah, did I confuse you because I can't spell strength on the slide?
No, I don't think so.
I just picked up on that. So that I did too.
Your eyes see it and think it's correct.
Right.
The trick of how quickly our brain corrects misspelling, you don't even see it.
It's awesome. I love it. I love it. Okay, yeah. So that's a really intelligent question as well. 4-14-24. So when we program strength and stamina together, and this might be 4 rounds of a kettlebell swing, a pull-up, a push-up, and a step-up on a box. We want to show proficiency in movements that are intense at 4 minutes long, 14 minutes long, and 24 minutes long. There's really good science and data showing that the more proficient you are going short and fast and being able to maintain heart rate at 80% or so, like what I call time trial speed at 24 minutes and 14, it's going to balance you out athletically and make you healthier. So if I were to ask Lester, I said, well, if you and I were to compete in a 500-meter row, which takes about 2 minutes or less, you might be really good at that. But because you're just more powerful than me, but if I take it out to 1,000 meters now, which is about, longer than that, or 3,000 meters, I might beat you because I've trained in that time domain longer than you have. And I'm looking for that balance across the board. So it's a question back to you, Lester, or back to everybody else that's listening. Are you changing up your programs? Are you doing some 4-minute movements, 4-minute complexes, 14-minute complexes, and 24-minute complexes? And I'll conclude that answer by saying, if it's 24 minutes, that's fine. You just learn how to pace yourself a little bit better. But again, practice what you don't do so well, and make sure that weakness gets balanced out.
Yeah, I like that concept because, I say to people all the time, sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes we get over focused on the 1 rep max or the 4 rep max. And, and I hate to say it's like, but how often does the 70-year-old lady have to perform her 1 rep max in the parking lot of the grocery store? But she might have to do 20 reps of something, so you need both, right? Both are important. There are times where you have to lift something heavy 1 or 2 times, but there are a lot of times where you have to lift something heavy 20 times, 30 times, 50 times.
So that's a great point, Dan. And here's what I'm going to say to everybody out there. That's why we, as part of that strength and stamina, we introduce a lot of grip strength movement. A lot of science and data is coming out showing, I always say, show me an athlete with good grip strength and I'll show you a strong athlete. Yeah. There's a lot of good data and science coming out how important that is. So, and everybody's like, okay, great. So the fitness industry says, let's do a bunch of farmer carries, right? That becomes, and I said, well, yeah, but how often? I just walk through an airport. I walk through airports all the time. And if I'm with my family, I've got like a stroller, 2 backpacks, I'm pushing something. So, suitcase carries in programming is really important. How many of you are holding a 50-pound kettlebell in your right arm, walking up a hill, but nothing in your left arm, right? So those are the things that we try to incorporate in this while monitoring your heart rate, because it's to be honest.
There's more and more stuff coming out about grip strength and mortality and grip strength and longevity. The conclusion is not that everyone has to do dead arm hangs for 10 reps. It's like, wait, there's a
great point.
reality. If you have poor grip strength, it's probably because you have poor total body strength, right? It's like you can't just solve your mortality issue by just training grip. And I see some people go the wrong direction with that. It's like you have to think of the research in its totality. Paula asked a great question because it's fundamental, Doug, especially for a lot of our population, right? People in their 60s and 70s and 80s who have never worked out with a barbell. How do you just overcome fear, right? Like they walk in, they're like, wait, you're going to make me use a barbell? Are you sure? Like, I want to go to that other place where it's like a chair-based class with 2-pound dumbbells.
Right. I think it depends. I think it depends on those people need some leadership and they need some inspiration and they need some context of why those movements are important. Usually people that walk into a gym that are over the age of 50, 60-ish, they are looking for someone to help guide them. And instead of talking about the bar, I would talk about the movements first of all, and I would say, well, how do you feel? I would assess if they could squat to parallel. I could watch them if they could pick something up from the ground. And I would say, are you interested in learning some movements that are going to get you results faster and make you feel better, and prevent you from being injured and actually get you back to where you were a decade ago or whatever the reference is, right? So I think it's less about the barbell and more about the movements. you know, I have a guy named Dana Sanders. He's 68 years old, former executive, and been coaching him for 15, 18 years. And, you know, he was that way, right? And we just kind of snuck it in. We just kind of said, hey, look, we're going to focus. Here's the good news. It's 3 movements: squat, press, and deadlift. That's all you got to do. Does that sound good to you? Or do you want to do a program with 19 exercises, 14 of which don't do anything for you? So good, you know, good trainers keep it simple. Like, I'm not smart enough to do really good program with 18 movements, and it's probably not very effective, right? And that 70-year-old lady, right, to the question, start her off with a rack pull with a 5 kg bar at quad level, and let her build confidence. I can tell you that the light bulbs go off when people learn barbell movement. They actually, in a couple of weeks, they're floating on air when they walk, and then they become confident, right? They walk, and I see it all the time. And I love that, right? For me, that's the payoff when you see that. It's not like everybody has to become an Olympic lifter and clean and jerk and snatch and be a power lifter and lift with chains and bands, right? Keep it simple. But yeah, find a good resource.
Okay. Can you just quickly go over the squatting progressions again?
Yes. So when we talk about squat progressions, you know, we focus on helping people get to parallel. A squat, if you're not getting to parallel or breaking parallel, it's not a squat. And it's actually more pressure and more dangerous for your knees if you're not squatting to parallel, right? Again, the opposite of what most people are doing. So we always start with a body weight squat, right? We're teaching our seminars and we go, oh, I still can't go to parallel. We put a little bumper plate in front, not little weights underneath their heels. We want things that are practical, but we have them hold a little plate, and that always brings them down, right? Because you have that load vertically. So body weight squat, back squat, front squat, overhead squat. Now, there's high bar back squat, low bar back squat, there's box squats. Get into that later. That's another seminar. Let's keep it super simple. Body weight. So if you go back to that training matrix and it says squatting 2 to 3 days a week, that might be a body weight squat for some people. That's fine. We like to mix up the squats, right? And then once people can understand how to body weight, back squat, and front squat, overhead squat for some people, maybe not terribly necessary. I like it because it's very athletic. I like it in warm-ups, but you want to be able to high bar back squat and front squat with proficiency because they do attack different musculature. And the front squat, for example, is fantastic for, guess what? Shoulder mobility. So there's so many benefits to all these things. That's for another day.
Okay. Same person, Cindy asks what your thoughts are about a Smith machine.
Cindy, that's a good question. I'm never politically correct. I would be cautious of using one at the moment. I just think that it restricts movement to a degree. It also doesn't really reinforce balance, agility, and control. If anything, somebody that's a lot stronger or more athletically inclined or has the integrity of tendon and ligamentous tissue that's capable of going through that type of mono movement, I'm a little cautious of that. I want somebody to show me that they can move through space and teach me, I want to see somebody squat with keeping their feet on the ground and being able to balance. I think the balance agility thing is a really big thing because I see more and more people, especially as they age, they're not paying attention to that. So
that was a really well maneuvered way of saying you're not a big fan of the Smith machine.
I like it if I'm in a hotel and I have to use it and that's all there is, I will.
Sure.
But it's not really a preferred modality for us.
All right, Rhonda's got a good question because this comes up, and I have talked to trainers about this, and as much as we want to say, hey, outfit your place the way you want, Rhonda's like, look, more and more I'm working in community settings where there's no fitness equipment available whatsoever. I can't equip the community space. I'm going into a retirement community facility, and sometimes it's just an empty room with nothing, right? So resistance bands might be the only thing I can travel with me. What are your thoughts there in terms of how do we maximize these movements?
So give me an empty room with a fantastic coach. I'll take that all the time over a room loaded with great equipment and a crappy coach. So know what to do. How do you inspire people? How do you do that? That's going to make a big impact. You can still do body weight squats. You can do stepping up on things. You can lunge. You could take those bands and do good mornings. You could teach those people to lift things off the ground with the bands. You could find other implements to do that with. Teaching, if you're going in a community center, and again, my guess is that most people can't do 10 push-ups in a row. And if you can, if any of you out there right now can do more than, I don't know what the number is because there's no science on it, 15 or 20 push-ups in a row, chest to deck, full lockout, then I'd be putting in, if you don't have access to benches and all that stuff, then I'd be putting some weight on my upper back. That's a progression for us with push-ups. And we program that on a regular basis, by the way. So just because you can prove you can do a body weight push-up doesn't mean you're done. That means if I'm working out with Dan, and I know Dan's strong, I'm gonna put a 25-pound plate on Dan's upper back and watch him do his push-up, which also trains his midline, his core, and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, sure.
So you can find other implements to lift. There's this little coffee shop we go to on the weekends all the time, right? And they have all these big stumps out back, and I'm like, you know what? That's a great. So I'm out there lifting the stump around, playing with my daughters because I want to get extra work in. So you can find things to do, and if you just have bands, great. That's awesome. Lift them, right?
Yeah, what I would say, Rhonda, look into it's Anchor Point Training. I can't remember. I think Chris is speaking at the summit this year. He's sponsored the summit in the past. Chris has some bands that are super heavy. I mean, like 80 to 100 pounds worth of resistance force. It's not your typical exercise band. So I've seen him use those with some like strong men, like super strong guys, and they're always amazed that the band can give them a solid workout.
There's a lot of things too. Like, Rhonda, email me and I'll give you some variations of those movements. Right on push-ups, we do switch hand push-ups where we'll put the hands like at different hours of the clock and move the arms around. And I'm a strong believer in a lot of lunging, right? So if you can't deadlift as much, you can do a lot of lunges, the step ups. Again, and for that older population, for most people really, not just the older population, the aging population, being able to carry stuff. So doing those step ups, doing those lunges, holding things overhead, all those variations, you could do some amazing programming with just body weight stuff.
Okay, last question for you. Somebody asked about the Romanian deadlift, and you have on here deadlift and variations. Other deadlift variations that you like, even with and without a barbell.
I think there's a joke. So a Smith machine and a Romanian deadlift go into a bar. It's kind of like the Smith machine question. I'm really cautious of that. I think it can put people in a compromising position unless they really understand how to biomechanically, through physics, position themselves. So we typically, as part of a deadlift progression in the beginning, we do not introduce a Romanian deadlift until much later. Good movement. It's just not one of those core competency deadlift movements. We like the traditional deadlift, the sumo deadlift. We do deficit deadlifting. We want to make sure, again, let's not forget about that speed word, being able to move it fast. Anybody can lift heavy. Can you lift heavy and fast? That's the secret sauce. So some of those movements, when you're in forward flexion or anytime you take a movement away from general center of mass from your body, it just requires more proficiency of movement. So I'm just a little cautious of that.
Yeah, sure. Okay, great. Can you go to your closing slide again for those on the recording? I know this is where they're like, oh, nobody asked this question. I wanted to ask this. Look, sure. Send Doug a video, email him your question. If there was some other question about, you got a question about what kind of barbells. I'm sure Doug is your go-to reference for that. I wanted to ask, I have been out of university strength conditioning for a long time. I mean, we used to order barbells all the time, and some of our guys, I was always shocked. I'm like, wow, okay, who bent the new barbell? You know, I mean, these guys were doing crazy stuff with 500 pounds on their back. And
Right.
are there barbells now that are different weights, right? Like to me, it's always been a 45-pound barbell. Are there 15, 20? I see some of this stuff and I'm like, there's no way she's deadlifting what looks like 300 pounds. I know the bumper plates now you can get in all kinds of sizes. You know, back in my day, it was everything was 45 pounds. In fact, we had some 55-pound plates and some bigger stuff, but we didn't have any 15-pound bumpers. Or I mean, are there barbells now coming in different sizes and weights?
Yeah, good question. There are. There's 5 kilogram, so there's 10-pound bars, 15-pound bars, 20-pound bars. That your typical barbell is a 15 kg or a 20 kg. 15 kg technically is about 34 pounds. 20 kg technically is about 44. So yeah, there are 5 kg, 10 kg, and those are great, right? Because a lot of those we call them training bars. So if we're trying to teach somebody how to do a squat, press, or deadlift, but they're a little challenged by even, for some people, 35, 34 pounds might be a little heavy.
Oh yeah.
Usually when you put the collars on the bar, that's why people say 35, 45-pound bars, because they put the collars on the bar and it makes it that. But there is, Dan, that's a great question, and we sell those too, right? And they're good, high quality bars, but there's absolutely no reason that you should not start with one of those if that's better. Again, better to do that than try to start with another implement. Use the barbell. People really gain confidence, and they feel good about themselves when they start moving a barbell around.
All right, awesome. Again, if you're on the replay, email Doug if you've got your question did not get asked. And then obviously check out their course and send them a video or a program to review. That's cool. Most of our speakers don't offer that. So thanks again for your time today, Doug. Thanks for supporting the summit. Again, June 13th and 14th, Functional Aging Summit. Don't say I didn't warn you. It absolutely may sell out here in the next week or two. I know the last minute folks will come piling in. So, all right. Thanks again, Doug. Thanks everyone for being on live, and have a good week.
See ya.